Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty and watched the last human ships leave the Kepler system. The evacuation had taken 3 months, but every human was now heading back to Earth. The massive transport ships moved slowly through space, carrying millions of people who had called distant worlds their home for decades. The Galactic Council had given humanity a simple choice: leave all colonies beyond the Sol system or face what they called corrective measures. The Council was tired of human expansion. They said humans were taking too much space too quickly. The other alien races had been in space for thousands of years, and they did not like how fast humans were spreading across the galaxy. Admiral Lisa Carter had been Earth's voice on the Council for 10 years. She knew every alien diplomat and spoke 5 different alien languages. When the ultimatum came, she had exactly 72 hours to give an answer. The Council expected her to beg or negotiate or ask for more time. Instead, she did something that shocked everyone. She said nothing. The silence was not what anyone expected. Humans were known for talking too much during diplomatic meetings. They asked questions and made long speeches and always wanted to discuss every detail. But when faced with the biggest threat in human history, their representative simply gathered her papers and walked out of the council chambers without speaking a single word. The alien diplomat sat in stunned silence after she left. Counselor. Fextar of the Zilani Empire had prepared for hours of human protests. He expected tears and anger, and desperate pleas for mercy. Instead, he got nothing but an empty chair where Admiral Carter had been sitting. Within days, every human installation began shutting down. Research stations went dark. Mining operations stopped. Diplomatic offices closed their doors. The galaxy watched in confusion as humanity simply vanished from interstellar space. They did not fight or argue or cause trouble. They just left. But the withdrawal was too organized to be simple panic. Every human colony had been evacuated in perfect order. Ships moved in coordinated fleets. Supply bases were emptied completely but left undamaged. It was clear that humans had planned for this possibility. Dr. Paul Andrews had spent 50 years working on something called the Prometheus Protocol. He was the smartest human scientist alive, and he had always known this day would come. While other humans focused on exploration and colonization, Andrews had been preparing for the moment when the galaxy would turn against them. The protocol was simple in concept, but incredibly complex in execution. If humanity was forced to leave galactic civilization, they would make sure their absence was felt in every possible way. Andrews had studied every alien species and cataloged every piece of human technology that had been integrated into galactic society. Humans were excellent engineers. They had a gift for making things work better and more efficiently. Over decades of peaceful contact, human improvements could be found in almost every alien system. Power generators ran more smoothly with human modifications. Communication networks carried more data with human upgrades. Even simple things like door locks and air recyclers had been touched by human innovation. The aliens thought these improvements were gifts. They never imagined they might be leverage. Commander Alex Murphy had been preparing his fleet for 3 years before the ultimatum came. His ships operated from hidden bases in asteroid fields and empty star systems. They used stealth technology that made them nearly invisible to alien sensors. Murphy's job was to watch and wait while the protocol activated. The beauty of the plan was that humans had never been aggressive. They had simply been helpful. Too helpful. Every system upgrade and every technological gift contained dormant code that could be triggered remotely. The code was buried so deep that alien technicians would never find it during routine maintenance. President Karen Ellis now governed humanity from a mobile command platform somewhere beyond the galactic rim. She had moved the entire government off Earth before the evacuation began. If the Council thought removing humans from their territory would solve their problem, they were about to learn how wrong they were. The first phase of withdrawal had been completed successfully. Every human citizen was safely back in Sol system or aboard the evacuation fleets. Now came the waiting period. Andrews estimated it would take 6 months for the aliens to realize what they had lost. The Prometheus Protocol was designed to activate gradually, creating problems that would seem like coincidences at first. Jake Morrison looked at the data streaming across his command screens. Hidden sensors throughout Council space were reporting normal operations. Alien ships still moved between stars. Trade continued as usual. Government communications flowed without interruption. Everything appeared peaceful and stable on the surface. But Morrison knew better. Deep in the code of 10,000 different systems, countdown timers were approaching zero. In 6 months, the galaxy would begin to understand the true cost of forcing humanity into exile. The Council had wanted humans gone, and they had gotten their wish. Now they would learn what that absence really meant. Admiral Carter had returned to the Sol system aboard her flagship, the Sovereign. She had not spoken publicly since leaving the Council chambers, but her silence was becoming legendary. Other species in the galaxy were starting to worry about what it meant. A quiet human was apparently much more dangerous than a loud one. The evacuation fleets reached safe harbors in the outer system. Temporary cities were established on moons and asteroids to house the refugees. It was crowded and difficult, but every human understood they were part of something bigger than personal comfort. They were proving that humanity could not be pushed around by bullies. Andrews reviewed his calculations one final time. The protocol would work because it was based on a simple truth that the Council had ignored. Humans did not just occupy space in the galaxy. They had become part of the foundation that held galactic civilization together. Remove that foundation carefully, and nothing would collapse immediately. But eventually, cracks would appear. Theo. Silence continued. Not one human had attempted to contact the Council since the evacuation began. No protests, no negotiations, no desperate attempts to return. The quiet was beginning to make alien leaders nervous. They had expected humanity to come crawling back within months, begging to be allowed to return to their colonies. Instead, they got nothing but empty space where human voices used to be. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the most powerful response to aggression was to simply disappear and let others realize how much they had depended on what they took for granted. 6 months had passed since the last human ship left Council space. The galaxy had settled into a new normal without human voices in diplomatic meetings or human ships in the trade lanes. Most alien leaders considered the human problem solved. They had removed a troublesome species and could now return to the way things had been for millennia. The first sign of trouble came from the Krythan Mining Consortium. Their survey teams had been planning to exploit 3 asteroid belts in the former human territory. When the mining ships arrived, they found empty space where detailed scans had shown rich deposits of rare metals just months earlier. The asteroids were gone completely, stripped clean with a precision that baffled their best engineers. Mining Director Kexthor studied the reports with growing confusion. The asteroids had not been destroyed or moved. They had been systematically harvested using techniques that left no trace of the operation. Even the smallest fragments had been collected. It was as if the entire belt had been consumed by invisible machines. The Krythan engineers examined the empty space for weeks, but found no clues about how the mining had been accomplished. Their own equipment could not match such efficiency even when working at full capacity for years. Whoever had done this work possessed technology far beyond current galactic standards. Similar discoveries were reported from other systems. Valuable resources that had been cataloged for future exploitation were simply gone. Gas giants had been drained of their atmospheric chemicals. Ice comets had vanished from their orbital patterns. Even small moons rich in heavy elements had disappeared without explanation. Commander Alex Murphy watched the alien confusion from his hidden base in the Kuiper belt of an unnamed star system. His stealth fleet had spent decades preparing for this moment. While the galaxy focused on human colonies and settlements, Murphy's teams had seeded space with automated mining operations that worked in complete silence. The mining robots were marvels of human engineering. They could break down asteroids at the molecular level and sort the materials into useful categories. Solar collectors powered them indefinitely while they worked. When their tasks were complete, the machines would pack themselves into compact modules and jump to predetermined coordinates in human space. But the missing resources were just the beginning. Trade routes that had relied on human-maintained hyperspace beacons began experiencing navigation problems. Ships would drop out of hyperspace hours or days away from their intended destinations. Cargo vessels found themselves lost in empty space, with no way to determine their position. Captain Yexandra of the Zelani merchant fleet had used the same route between Zelani Prime and the Kepler system for 20 years. She knew every beacon and could navigate the path with her eyes closed. But 3 days into what should have been a routine journey, her navigation computers began showing impossible readings. The hyperspace beacons were still transmitting, but their signals contained subtle errors that threw off course calculations. Her ship dropped into normal space in an uncharted system with no idea how to reach her destination. It took 6 days of careful observation to determine their position and plot a new course home. The navigation problems spread throughout Council space. What had once been reliable routes became dangerous gambles. Ships began disappearing entirely, lost somewhere in the infinite void between stars. The few vessels that managed to return reported that their instruments had been providing false information for days without warning. President Karen Ellis authorized the next phase of the Prometheus protocol from her mobile command center. The hidden network of human technology throughout Council space received new instructions. Phase 2 would be more obvious than missing asteroids and navigation errors. It was time for the aliens to understand that human engineering was everywhere. Zelani communication network suffered its first major failure on a Tuesday morning. Quantum entanglement communicators that had worked flawlessly for decades suddenly began losing coherence. Messages became garbled or arrived hours late. Some transmissions disappeared entirely into the quantum foam that connected distant worlds. Zelani. Technicians worked frantically to identify the problem. The quantum communicators were based on principles that had been perfected centuries ago. They were considered absolutely reliable because they operated outside normal space-time. Yet somehow the entire network was degrading simultaneously across multiple star systems. What the technicians did not know was that human physicists had made subtle improvements to the quantum entanglement process years earlier. The improvements increased transmission speed and reduced power consumption. They also included hidden subroutines that could introduce specific types of interference when activated remotely. Dr. Rachel Stone coordinated the communication disruption from her laboratory aboard the research vessel Horizon. She had been the lead scientist on the Quantum Communication Improvement Project. Her team had spent 3 years embedding undetectable backdoors into the alien communication systems. Now those backdoors were being opened one by one. The cascade failures spread like a virus through interconnected networks. Each quantum communicator that went offline created additional stress on the remaining devices. The network began collapsing, under its own weight as nodes failed faster than they could be repaired or replaced. Military communications were affected first, leaving alien fleets unable to coordinate their movements. Then government networks began failing, cutting planets off from their colonial administrations. Finally, commercial communications collapsed, bringing interstellar trade to a grinding halt. General Ryan Phillips monitored the situation from his command ship, hidden in a nebula that masked all sensor signatures. His fleet remained invisible, while alien military forces struggled with communication blackouts and navigation failures. Ships that had been searching for hidden human bases now found themselves stranded in their home systems. The Krathan military had launched their largest operation in decades to locate and destroy human installations. Their battle fleets had jumped into empty systems where intelligence suggested human activity. Instead of finding enemy bases, they discovered that their quantum drives would no longer function properly. The jump drives had been upgraded with human modifications that increased range and improved efficiency. The modifications included safety protocols that prevented dangerous jumps into stars or black holes. But the same protocols could also prevent all jumps if the right command codes were transmitted. Krathan Admiral Thexcol found his entire fleet trapped in the Rigel system with no way to return home. Their quantum drives would charge normally, but refused to engage when jump coordinates were entered. Engineering teams worked around the clock but could not override the safety lockouts that had been embedded in their control systems. Similar Problems affected fleets throughout Council space. Ships that had relied on human improvements to their drive systems discovered they could no longer travel faster than light. Vessels that had been days away from their home ports now faced journeys that would take months or years at sublight speeds. The psychological impact was devastating. Alien crews began to question every piece of technology on their ships. If the jump drives had been compromised, what about life support systems? What about the artificial gravity generators? What about the food synthesizers? How deep did human influence extend into their most basic systems? Some captains ordered complete shutdowns of any equipment that showed signs of human modification. The result was ships drifting powerless through space as their crews tried to operate critical systems manually. Many vessels had to be abandoned when their life support failed completely. Councillor Vextar called for emergency sessions to address the growing crisis, but the council chamber's communication systems no longer functioned reliably. Holographic projections flickered and disappeared. Translation software produced garbled nonsense instead of converting between alien languages. Even simple audio systems failed without warning. The galaxy was beginning to understand that humans had not simply occupied space. They had become integrated into the fundamental infrastructure that made interstellar civilization possible. Every improvement and every helpful modification had created dependencies that no one had recognized until they were gone. The silence from human space continued. Not a single transmission had been detected from the Sol system since the evacuation ended. The quiet was becoming more ominous with each passing day as alien systems continued to fail in ways that seemed impossible to fix. The crisis began in earnest when the Zilani homeworld lost power. 3 massive fusion reactors that provided energy for the entire planet shut down simultaneously at exactly 0300 local time. There were no warnings, no gradual system failures, no emergency alerts. The reactors simply stopped producing power as if someone had thrown a switch. Emergency backup generators activated automatically, but they could only support critical systems for a few hours. The Zilani had grown dependent on the massive energy output from their primary reactors. Without that power, their cities would go dark and their atmospheric processors would fail within days. Chief Engineer Dex Moran had maintained the fusion reactors for 30 years. She knew every component and every safety system by heart. The reactors used human-designed control systems that had been installed 5 years earlier to improve efficiency and reduce maintenance requirements. Those systems had worked flawlessly until this moment. When Dex Moran tried to restart the reactors, the control computers displayed error messages in human script that none of her technicians could read. The fusion chambers were physically intact and contained enough fuel for decades of operation. But the startup sequences would not engage no matter what commands were entered. The reactor shutdowns were not isolated incidents. Similar failures occurred across Zilani space within hours of each other. Industrial worlds lost their power grids. Agricultural planets saw their atmospheric processors go offline. Space stations switched to emergency power as their main generators failed mysteriously. General Ryan Phillips coordinated the operation from his flagship Defiant, hidden deep in a nebula that absorbed sensor scans. His teams had spent years mapping every piece of human technology in Council space. The shutdown commands were transmitted using quantum channels that could not be detected or blocked by alien monitoring systems. The beauty of the attack was its surgical precision. Human engineers had never been destructive in their modifications. They had simply made alien systems work better while embedding dormant control codes deep in the operating software. The codes waited patiently for years until they received the proper activation signals. Dr. Paul Andrews had designed the shutdown protocols to be reversible but unbreakable from the outside. Alien technicians could spend decades trying to bypass the lockouts without success. The only way to restore normal operations was to receive the deactivation codes from human sources. Water treatment facilities across Council space began failing. Next, the massive plants that purified water for billions of alien citizens used filtration systems enhanced with human nanotechnology. The microscopic machines that removed toxins and harmful bacteria simply stopped working when their control programs received new instructions. On the Krithan industrial world of Nextar, 30 million workers depended on treated water from centralized facilities. When the purification systems shut down, the planet faced a choice between dying of thirst or drinking contaminated water that would kill them slowly. Emergency supplies could support the population for only a few days. Krythan officials tried to restart the water plants using backup control systems, but discovered that the human modifications had become integral to the filtration process. Without the nanotechnology, the plants could remove only basic impurities. Industrial pollutants and toxic chemicals remained in the water supply at dangerous levels. Transportation networks collapsed as automated systems failed throughout council space. Magnetic levitation trains that carried millions of commuters daily found their guidance computers locked in diagnostic mode. Orbital elevators that moved cargo between planets and space stations stopped operating when their control systems detected phantom safety violations. The failures cascaded through interconnected systems like a virus spreading through a computer network. When transportation hubs shut down, supply chains broke. When supply chains broke, manufacturing centers could not get raw materials. When manufacturing stopped, the entire economic foundation of galactic civilization began cracking. Admiral Kate Johnson watched the chaos unfold from her stealth carrier, positioned in the outer reaches of council space. Her ghost fleet remained invisible to alien sensors while monitoring communication channels for signs of panic. The aliens were discovering that removing humans from their territory had consequences far beyond empty colonies. Medical facilities reported equipment failures that baffled their best technicians. Diagnostic scanners that could detect diseases at the cellular level displayed only error messages. Surgical robots that performed delicate operations with superhuman precision refused to power up. Life support systems in hospitals reverted to manual operation as their automation protocols failed. Dr. Rachel Stone had overseen the medical technology improvements that were now causing such devastation. Her team had enhanced alien medical equipment to save lives more effectively and reduce human suffering throughout the galaxy. The same compassionate modifications now threatened to cause a medical catastrophe of unprecedented scale. Hospitals across council space faced impossible choices. They could attempt to treat patients using primitive equipment that had not been used for decades, or they could let people die while their advanced systems sat idle. Many medical professionals had never learned to operate without the human-enhanced automation that had made their jobs easier. The Jotun Republic attempted to solve their problems through military action. Their battle fleet launched a desperate search for human bases, hoping to capture the technology needed to reverse the system failures. But their ships discovered that their own weapon systems had been affected by the cascading breakdowns. Targeting. Computers that guided missiles to their destinations began producing random error codes. Energy weapons that had been upgraded with human power management systems could not maintain stable firing patterns. Even basic functions like navigation and communication became unreliable as more systems failed. Jotun Admiral Kef Taran found his fleet helpless against an enemy they could not locate or engage. The humans had vanished completely from detectable space, but their influence remained embedded in every piece of technology that kept galactic civilization running. Counselor. Vextar called for emergency meetings using primitive communication methods that had not been used for centuries. Radio transmissions replaced quantum entanglement networks. Written messages carried by courier ships substituted for instant holographic conferences. The advanced civilization that had ruled the galaxy was being forced to communicate like primitives. The psychological impact was devastating. Alien populations that had lived in comfort for generations now faced shortages of power, water, food, and medical care. Some worlds attempted to return to pre-industrial technology, rather than risk using systems that might contain human modifications. But reversing centuries of technological advancement was not simple. Populations that numbered in the billions could not be supported by primitive agriculture and manufacturing. Industrial knowledge that had been replaced by automated systems was lost. Engineers who could maintain fusion reactors had no idea how to build windmills or water wheels. The result was social collapse on dozens of worlds. Riots broke out in cities as power grids failed and transportation stopped. Agricultural worlds, faced starvation as their mechanized farming systems shut down. Industrial centers became ghost towns as factories could no longer operate. Yet through all of this chaos, not a single human ship had been detected in Council space. No human voices appeared on communication channels. No human bases had been discovered despite desperate searching. The species that had been driven from the galaxy was inflicting more damage through absence than they ever could have through warfare. Commander Alex Murphy's stealth fleet observed the growing catastrophe. While remaining completely hidden, his ships watched alien rescue operations fail as their equipment malfunctioned. They monitored distress calls from isolated colonies begging for help that would never come. The galaxy was learning that humanity had become essential to its survival. The silence from human space continued. Earth transmitted no diplomatic messages, no demands for negotiation, no offers of assistance. The most communicative species in galactic history had become mute, and their quiet was more terrifying than any threat they could have made. Alien leaders who had celebrated humanity's departure now faced the reality of their decision. They had removed what they thought was a minor irritation. Instead, they had pulled out a support beam that had been holding up their entire civilization. The galaxy was collapsing under its own weight, and the only beings who could fix it had disappeared into the dark. 2 years had passed since humanity vanished from galactic space, and the crisis had grown beyond anything the Council could have imagined. What began as isolated equipment failures had become a cascade of civilization collapse that threatened to destroy everything the galaxy had built over millennia. The Zalani Empire had lost contact with 3 of its 12 star systems completely. Their colonies had not been destroyed or abandoned, but communication networks had degraded to the point where no messages could reach them. Ships sent to check on these worlds often became lost themselves when their navigation systems failed. In the void between stars, Emperor Thexferin stood in his throne room on Zalani Prime, looking out at a city lit only by primitive torches and chemical lamps. The massive fusion reactors that had powered his homeworld remained silent despite the efforts of thousands of technicians. His people were slowly reverting to a pre-industrial existence, while their advanced technology sat uselessly around them. The Crithan Mining Consortium faced even worse problems. Their orbital refineries had been completely automated using human-designed systems that managed everything from raw material processing to quality control. When those systems shut down, the consortium discovered that none of their current employees knew how to operate the machinery manually. Mining Director Kexthor had been forced to evacuate 12 asteroid mining stations when their life support systems failed. The stations contained equipment worth trillions of credits, but without functioning automation, they were death traps for any crew that tried to work in them. Worse still, the mining ships that had been searching for human bases were now stranded throughout the galaxy. Their quantum drives had stopped working months ago, leaving them to drift on chemical rockets that could take decades to reach safety. Some crews had already died when their recycling systems failed and could not be repaired. Dr. Rachel Stone monitored the medical crisis from her hidden laboratory aboard the research vessel Horizon. Hospital networks across Council space were reporting mortality rates not seen since the early days of space colonization. Diseases that had been easily treatable with human-enhanced medical equipment were becoming deadly again. The irony was not lost on her. Human medical improvements had saved billions of alien lives over the decades. Now the same technology was causing suffering on an unprecedented scale simply by not working. The moral weight of the situation troubled her, but she understood the necessity of the demonstration. Food production had collapsed on agricultural worlds throughout Council space. Automated farming systems that managed crop rotation, soil treatment, and harvesting had been enhanced with human biotechnology that improved yields while reducing environmental impact. Without those improvements, crop failures were becoming commonplace. The Jotun Republic faced famine on 6 of its agricultural worlds. Their food distribution networks had also relied on human logistics software that optimized shipping routes and storage allocation. With those systems offline, surplus food rotted in warehouses while other regions starved. President Karen Ellis received daily reports on the humanitarian crisis from her mobile command platform. The human leadership was not ignorant of the suffering their actions were causing, but they also remembered the ultimatum that had forced them from their homes. The council had chosen confrontation over cooperation, and consequences were inevitable. Admiral Kate Johnson's Ghost Fleet continued their invisible patrol of council space. Her ships remained undetectable while observing the desperate attempts to restore technological civilization. Alien engineering teams worked frantically to bypass human modifications, but they lacked the fundamental understanding of how the improvements had been integrated. The most advanced alien scientists could identify where human technology had been added to their systems, but removing it often caused complete failure of the underlying equipment. The human modifications had not been simple additions. They had become structural elements that could not be extracted without destroying the host systems. General Ryan Phillips coordinated increasingly complex operations to maintain the technological quarantine. His hidden bases produced specialized interference signals that prevented alien attempts to reverse engineer human code. Every time council scientists made progress toward understanding the lockouts, new complications appeared to frustrate their efforts. The psychological warfare was as important as the technological attack. Alien populations needed to understand that their suffering was directly connected to their leaders' decision to expel humanity. The message was reinforced every time a system failed or a repair attempt was sabotaged. Some alien worlds attempted to completely abandon advanced technology, rather than deal with the constant failures. But centuries of population growth based on high-tech agriculture and manufacturing could not be supported by primitive methods. Billions of beings faced starvation if they rejected modern systems, but those same systems were increasingly unreliable. Chapter: Zelani military launched increasingly desperate missions to locate human strongholds. Their generals believed that capturing even a single human base would provide the technology needed to end the crisis. But human stealth capabilities had improved dramatically during the years of galactic expansion. Commander Alex Murphy's fleet used adaptive camouflage systems that could mimic asteroid signatures or nebula formations. His ships could hide in plain sight while alien search parties passed within scanning range. The technology had been developed for exploration purposes, but proved invaluable for covert operations. Counselor Vextar convened emergency sessions using courier ships and primitive radio transmissions. The council chambers that had once hosted holographic conferences with representatives from hundreds of worlds now resembled a medieval court where messages were delivered by hand. The translation systems that had made multi-species diplomacy possible were among the first casualties of the technological breakdown. Council members who had relied on automated translation for decades found themselves unable to communicate effectively. Important negotiations were delayed for hours, while translators worked manually to convert between languages. The economic impact was staggering. Interstellar trade had ground to a halt when transportation and communication systems failed. Worlds that specialized in particular industries could no longer export their products or import necessities. The complex web of interdependence that had created galactic prosperity was unraveling completely. Financial networks that tracked credits and managed investments across star systems had been enhanced with human algorithms that detected fraud and optimized transactions. Without those systems, economic activity reverted to primitive barter as no one could verify the value or authenticity of electronic transfers. The Krithan government attempted to hire human refugees from the Sol system to help restore their technology. But every communication sent toward human space disappeared into silence. Earth and its colonies had become completely isolated, as if humanity had never existed at all. Some council members began to suspect that the humans were not simply hiding in their home system. Ships sent to observe the Sol system from long range reported normal activity around Earth and its colonies, but no human vessel had been detected leaving the system since the evacuation ended. The truth was that humanity had developed transportation, methods that bypassed conventional hyperspace entirely. Dr. Paul Andrews had been working on dimensional folding technology that could move ships through parallel space without leaving detectable traces. Human fleets could travel anywhere in the galaxy without using the hyperspace beacons that alien sensors monitored. Desperation drove some alien leaders to consider unthinkable options. The Zilani Emperor ordered his remaining functional warships to approach the Sol system and demand that humanity end the technological blockade. But the ships never reached their destination, becoming lost when their navigation systems failed in the outer reaches of Council space. Medical emergency teams from the Yodan Republic attempted to steal human medical equipment from abandoned research stations, but they discovered that the equipment would not function outside of human control networks. Even when physically transported to alien facilities, the devices remained inert and useless. The crisis reached its peak when the atmospheric processors on the Zilani homeworld began showing signs of imminent failure. The massive machines that made the desert planet habitable had been upgraded with human environmental controls that optimized gas mixtures and filter efficiency. Without those controls, the processors could not maintain a breathable atmosphere for the planet's population. Emperor Thexvaran faced the prospect of evacuating his entire homeworld within months. But evacuation was impossible when most of his fleet was stranded in distant systems with non-functional drive systems. The Emperor, who had supported humanity's expulsion, now watched his empire crumble from the consequences of that decision. The silence from human space remained absolute. No diplomatic overtures had been received, despite increasingly desperate attempts to establish contact. The galaxy was discovering that humanity had not been the aggressive expansionists described by Council propaganda, but rather the foundation upon which galactic civilization had been built. The end came when the atmospheric processors on Zilani Prime began their final countdown to failure. Chief Engineer Dex Moran stood in the control room watching readouts that showed cascading system breakdowns throughout the massive machines that kept her world habitable. She had 6 months before the processors would shut down completely, condemning billions of Zilani to suffocation. The processors had been enhanced with human environmental controls 15 years earlier. Those controls managed gas ratios, filter, replacement schedules, and energy distribution with a precision that alien technology could not match. Without them, the machines were consuming themselves trying to maintain atmospheric balance on a world that could not support life naturally. Emperor Thexvaran convened his final council meeting in a bunker deep beneath his palace. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows on the faces of advisors who had once ruled star systems, spanning hundreds of light years. Now they governed a dying empire that could barely maintain power for essential systems. The choice was simple, but devastating. They could continue trying to restore their technology while their worlds became uninhabitable, or they could surrender unconditionally to humanity and hope for mercy. The proud Zilani Empire that had dominated galactic politics for millennia faced the prospect of begging for help from the species they had expelled. Councillor Vexitar volunteered for the mission that might save galactic civilization. A single ship would make the journey to Sol system using chemical rockets and navigation by stellar observation. The trip would take 8 months, but it was the only way to reach humanity when all advanced communication and transportation systems had failed. The courier ship Redemption launched from Zilani Prime with a crew of volunteers who knew they might not survive the journey. Captain Yexandra had piloted merchant vessels for 30 years, but had never attempted interstellar travel without quantum drives or hyperspace beacons. She would navigate by dead reckoning across thousands of light years of empty space. Admiral Lisa Carter received the surrender document in her ready room aboard the flagship Sovereign. She had spent 3 years in absolute silence, watching the galaxy tear itself apart rather than admit its dependence on human innovation. The formal surrender was written in elegant Zilani script, but its message was simple: complete capitulation. The document offered humanity everything they had been denied before the expulsion: unrestricted colonization rights throughout the galaxy, permanent seats on the governing council with veto power over major decisions, war reparations in the amount of 50 trillion galactic credits, complete autonomy for all human territories with no outside interference. Carter read the surrender terms carefully, while her senior staff waited in silence. Captain Jake Morrison had commanded the evacuation fleet that brought millions of humans home 3 years ago. General Ryan Phillips had coordinated the technological warfare that brought the Council to its knees. Dr. Paul Andrews had designed the Prometheus protocol that made it all possible. The Admiral looked up from the document and walked to the communication console. For the first time in 3 years, she opened a channel to Council Space. Her voice would be heard by billions of alien beings who had forgotten what human voices sounded like. "This is Admiral Lisa Carter of the Human Federation," she said, her words carrying across light years to receivers that had waited in silence for so long. "Your terms are acceptable with modifications. The human colonization moratorium was imposed because you considered our expansion too aggressive. We will now demonstrate what aggressive expansion actually means. Effective immediately, human space extends to all systems within 200 light-years of Sol. Any Council presence within that sphere will be relocated at our expense to suitable worlds beyond the boundary. This is not a negotiation, it is a statement of the new reality. Additionally, licensing fees will be charged for the continued use of human technology throughout Council space. We calculate the accumulated value of our innovations at approximately 100 trillion galactic credits. Payment schedules can be arranged to prevent economic collapse during the transition period." Dr. Andrews authorized the reactivation sequence from his laboratory aboard the research station that had become humanity's mobile capital. The quantum signals that had locked down galactic technology for 3 years were replaced with restoration codes that brought systems back online throughout Council space. Lights returned to darkened cities across 1,000 worlds. Fusion reactors resumed their steady hum after years of silence. Water purification plants began producing clean drinking water for populations that had been rationing contaminated supplies. Medical equipment powered up in hospitals where doctors had been performing surgery by candlelight. The restoration was carefully controlled to demonstrate human capability without appearing merciful. Systems were reactivated gradually over several months, reminding alien populations that their technological civilization existed only at human discretion. The message was clear. This crisis could be repeated at any time if humanity was threatened again. President Karen Ellis addressed the galaxy from her command platform, speaking directly to alien populations for the first time since the Exodus began. Her speech was transmitted on every functional communication network, reaching beings who had never heard a human voice but had suffered from human absence. The Galactic Council ordered humanity to abandon our colonies because they feared our rapid expansion, she said. We complied with that ultimatum completely. We left your territory, ended all diplomatic contact, and withdrew to our home system as demanded. You got exactly what you asked for. But you discovered that removing humanity from galactic space meant removing the foundation that supported your technological civilization. Every improvement we made to your systems, every enhancement we provided to your equipment, every innovation we shared with your scientists had become integral to your way of life. We did not cause this crisis through aggression or sabotage. We simply took our cooperation with us when we left. The suffering you experienced was the natural result of rejecting the partnership we had offered in friendship. The psychological impact of the restoration was as powerful as the crisis had been. Alien populations who had lived in darkness and fear suddenly found their lives returning to normal, but only because humanity allowed it. The message was unmistakable. Galactic civilization existed at human sufferance. Commander Alex Murphy brought his stealth fleet out of hiding for the first time in 3 years. Human warships appeared throughout Council space, their advanced technology making them invisible until they chose to be seen. The aliens realized that humanity had been watching their suffering while remaining completely undetected. The ships were not there as conquerors, but as shepherds. Their job was to oversee the transition period while alien governments adapted to the new reality. Human engineering teams began arriving at critical facilities to ensure that the reactivated systems would continue functioning reliably. The economic transformation was swift but carefully managed. Human corporations established operations throughout the expanded territory, bringing employment and prosperity to worlds that had been struggling since the crisis began. But the jobs came with the understanding that human interests would always take priority. Some alien leaders attempted to resist the new order, but discovered that their resistance only resulted in localized system failures. Power grids would flicker when governors made speeches against human expansion. Communication networks would experience delays when diplomats criticized human policies. The message was subtle but clear. The Crethan Mining Consortium found that their asteroid extraction operations could only function with human technical support. The Jotun agricultural worlds discovered that their crop yields depended on human biotechnology that could be withdrawn at any time. The Zelani transportation network required human maintenance to keep moving goods between star systems. Within 5 years, the galaxy had been transformed into a network of human-protected territories and human-dependent client states. The old council still existed but functioned primarily as an administrative body that implemented human policy decisions. Real power resided with the Human Federation and its expanding sphere of influence. Dr. Rachel Stone established medical research stations throughout the former council space, developing treatments for diseases that affected alien populations. But the facilities also served as reminders that alien healthcare depended on human knowledge and goodwill. The compassionate scientist had become an instrument of soft power projection. The historical record of the crisis became required study. In schools throughout the galaxy, young beings learned about the catastrophe that had nearly destroyed galactic civilization when their leaders made the mistake of threatening humanity. The lesson was clear. Cooperation with humans brought prosperity, while opposition brought darkness. Admiral Carter's response to the Council's surrender became legendary throughout the galaxy. When asked why humanity had chosen silence over negotiation during the crisis, she gave an answer that redefined interstellar diplomacy. When someone demands that you leave, the most powerful response is to make them beg you to come back. Humanity had left without a word when threatened with force,